Hi, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of Explicitly Pro-Life Podcast. I'm Kristen Hawkins, and you are joining us in a special mini-series that I am so excited to finally have on the podcast, Pro-Life Economics. And I know the term economics might seem scary or boring or something you really care about, but you should. And this is something that we need to chat about as pro-lifers, about how do we address and talk about and create innovative solutions to the challenges and problems that women face, that families face, without embracing the evil of socialism and why socialism is evil and why it will not save lives. This might be controversial for some of you, so if it is, make sure you definitely stay tuned. Today, we have a very special guest, Dr. Catherine Pakaluk, who is an assistant professor at Catholic University. She is a professor of social research and economic thought. She did her doctoral work at Harvard University under the 2016 Nobel laureate Oliver Hart and co-authored highly cited articles in social science and epidemiological journals like Demography, Economic Inquiry, and the Journal of National Cancer Institute. She's currently writing a book, get this, on motive and meaning among women who have large families in America. I'm super stoked to read that book. She splits her time between New Hampshire and the wild suburbs of Maryland. I'm so glad to have somebody on the show who has more kids than me. I often get, wow, you have such a large family. But I only have 4 kids, and I'm always like, you don't hang out in the circles I hang out with, because in my circle, I have a pretty small family. So thanks for joining us, Catherine.
Funny. Oh, you're so welcome. It's good to be with you, Kristen.
Well, I can't wait for this book, but we're not talking about large families today, although this might come up in our discussion a little bit.
It probably will.
It probably will. I actually attended a lecture you gave a couple of years ago, and I remember taking tons of notes from it and referring back about human ecology. And I thought some of the explanations that you were giving in this presentation, I thought really got to address a lot of questions that we get, or that I often hear from young pro-life advocates who kind of hear from their professors that, capitalism is evil and socialism is good. And, if you're really pro-life, you would embrace socialism, because socialism will make sure a woman never feels like she has to choose abortion, because she'll get guaranteed universal income and high minimum wage and free healthcare and free childcare and free. And then there would be no abortions and rainbows and unicorns for everybody. So why is that wrong?
It sounds like the promised land, what you're describing.
Yes,
Gosh,
it does.
I mean, why not? So I'm going to start by using a phrase that comes out of some of the history of the church, but I think it's something that really haunts me, which is sort of that, in reality, we don't get free and equal except in poverty. You can be free and equal in poverty, but you can't get free and equal and all have prosperity. So, so in other words, if you want to sort of tip the scales in the direction of everything being free and a kind of big, redistributive socialist agenda, you're going to get a kind of equality, but it's going to be miserable. And we see that theoretically, but of course, the experience of the 20th century really bears that out. I mean, if you want to, nobody wants to move to any explicitly socialist country today. And to bring this back to the topic that's closest to your heart, the former Soviet Union, the countries of the former Soviet Union are places that were just renowned, especially when I was growing up, for having some of the highest per capita abortion rates in the world. So I'm definitely excited to go ahead and talk about the things that are wrong with that. But the main thing that's wrong with it is it's a fiction. It's not something we can have, like the unicorn world for everybody. And we have to be realistic and then start to think a little bit about what we think human life is about and why we're here in this earth and what's our relationship to the earth. And this is this idea of ecology, right? So when we go and we look at you can see the forest behind me. I am up in New Hampshire right now. And one of the reasons we love taking our children here, we do every summer, is precisely to give them more of that exposure to nature. And when we sometimes we say nature with a capital N, and we kind of appreciate that, God designed it in a certain way, and there's ecosystems, and there's a sense in which God imbued the world with a certain kind of order. And we look at that as persons, we look at it and we see the animals and the trees and the plants, and we naturally see that it's beautiful, and we kind of want to respect it and assist it, like when things are choking each other off, we assist it, but we always want to like respect that sorry about my light, respect this plant. And so then human ecology is kind of like taking that view of nature and extending it to, and seeing ourselves in that, like God has a plan, put us there as well. What's our relationship to it? And then from that, you start to infer, like, actually, maybe our relationship to nature is not one where you just expect all the fruits to fall from the trees. I mean, but I'm saying that with a smile on my face, not to make fun of anybody, but, when we extrapolate to the modern economy where, I tell my children, like, it is a miracle that I can go to the grocery store and find an avocado either in New Hampshire or in Maryland. I love avocados, but they don't grow any place near me. The idea that should just land in my lap free, that I didn't work for it, nobody else would work for it. I mean, that's just crazy. And it's not how human life was presented to us and is presented to us. So, I mean, I've said a lot, probably too much to get started, but that's kind of what I mean when I talk about human ecology, and is like starting from a posture, which I think is quite natural and quite attractive, which is like studying the world and studying nature and studying, the animals and the plants, and then coming to see us, our family lives, as we've been given to each other as like givens, as part of the gift, and then discerning, okay, so what's my relationship to this beautiful system that God kind of prepared for us? Not even a system, this beautiful like environment that God prepared for us. And we see that, like, regardless of the economics in front of us, a bad system like a socialist system or a more free system like a capitalist system, nothing comes to us, just dripping out of the sky. So it's like there's some steps that are missing. I mean, nobody thinks that, in an agrarian society, things will just come without work. And so they shouldn't in a capitalist society too. We wouldn't expect that to happen.
Well, here's the question: Is capitalism a good or is it an evil?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, I don't want to beat around the bush. I'm going to come out swinging. So capitalism is a great thing. It's a good, but it's really important to qualify that. What do we mean by capitalism? I do, in general, prefer to talk about something like free economic systems or free enterprise, or a system in which we have, maybe even a better word would be to say ordered liberty, or we conduct our economic life within ordered liberty, right? So the liberty part doesn't apply to like free human rights necessarily. I mean, we could talk about what kinds of human rights are really rights, but the liberty part there means that we, as much as possible, within a moral framework, we allow people to kind of rise up with their creativity, their ingenuity, their willingness to work hard, their attitude towards thrift, and make a living for themselves and their families. We don't say, well, no, you can't sell, you can't sell tires for a living. You can't build this new market. So as long as things are sort of circumscribed by the moral law, right? I mean, we don't think people should buy and sell sex, for instance. There are some things that should not be for sale, but that as much as possible, we say, yeah, look, whatever it is that you feel inspired to do, to create, to first and foremost support your family, go for it. Like, that's great. That is that capitalism? I mean, that's, we can talk about the big bad corporations. We can talk about evil Wall Street. We can talk about financialization. And some of those things have things wrong with them, but those things are not innate to capitalism per se.
Okay.
So it's a complicated subject, but I'm definitely not going to sort of come out and be like, no, capitalism is, really messed up. I mean, if we're looking at these different alternatives in front of us, I mean, we have to pretty decidedly be on the side of free economic systems.
Free economic systems.
Yeah.
So what is so bad about socialism? What's the, when we hear socialism, I think of Venezuela, I think of, communism, countries like Cuba, I think about the failed, USSR. I think when my liberal friends think about socialism, they think
Yeah.
about Denmark and Sweden. It always
Yeah.
comes up. The
Yeah, they do.
Norwegian countries, right? I
Yeah.
think Bernie Sanders is like really quick to always like point to those countries.
Yeah.
But there's fundamentally something wrong with, and I'm just hearing well, it just never really has been implemented really well. If it was implemented well, this, Jesus would be a socialist. Why wouldn't Jesus be a socialist?
Yeah. So first of all, let's see.
Sorry, that was a lot of questions
No, that's
in one
okay.
thing.
And I want to address.
These are just off the top of my head. I'm just reliving conversations I've had.
Yeah, no, these are good things to ask about. So first of all, this point about like you and I think about Venezuela, but other people might think about like the Norwegian countries, and it's one of the biggest sort of myths of of contemporary political culture. So Denmark and Sweden and the Norwegian countries, they're not socialist. They're not socialist at all. They, in fact, they got kind of upset in the 2016 like election cycle because people, people were saying like, oh, they were like, wait, we're not socialist, So what it means to be socialist, I mean, there's a lot of different ways we could come upon it, but it really means to take progressive steps, or either all at once through some kind of revolution, or progressively through increasing rates of taxation to begin to confiscate both private property on the one hand. So that could be like your income. Like if I take 90% of your income away through taxation, do you really have property? I mean, we could talk about that. Probably most people would agree 90% is crazy. But we know that in some places in the world, we have these very high rates of taxation that when you add up like your state and your local and your city and your property taxes, they can definitely get upwards of 50%, right? And so is that socialism? No, it's not socialism yet, but it could be heading in that direction. So what's socialist is to do a couple of things, to sort of communalize all the things that we earn and our property through the things that we earn, and then try to redistribute it and plan its benefits in a certain way, right? Because we think, there's suffering, there's this or there's that. So countries like the Norwegian countries, why do people sometimes point to them as being socialist? Well, it's because they have a political preference for a higher rate of some kinds of taxation and redistribution, right? So certain kinds of social goods, they're more comfortable taxing and redistributing for them than we are. You can point to countries with more, we would say socialized medicine, for instance, like the United Kingdom is a place that has a more socialized medical system, but it doesn't make the United Kingdom socialist, right? They're comfortable with doing that. So another way to define socialism would be to say how many functions of public life are being run by the government. So, right, that's another way to think about it. In a pure socialist country, you'd say everything would be run by the government. How many functions are handled by the government? And so like schools, healthcare, maybe energy industries, public utilities, like maybe roads, maybe all the buildings, like maybe there's no private contracting companies, and you just keep going, right? And 100 years ago, it would have been easier to come up with a list, be like, here's all the things, and then let's get a central authority to plan it all out. And that would be sort of a big socialist enterprise. Today, it's harder. I mean, we saw this in the pandemic time about a year ago when different states were like, well, let's come up with a list of essential businesses. And actually, like in every state that I saw this happen, after they come up with a list, there'd be a bunch of people be like, wait a minute, what about me? Am I not essential? Right? It's like people don't even remember, like we don't even have a list. Like, here's all the things. You had no idea how many things there are. There's just so many things. It's kind of amazing. So, right, how many of those things get taken over by the government? And that's sort of more socialist. So that's probably a better way to think about socialism. So there's a right way to say that there's problems with, that these Norwegian countries, they're not socialist. It's not right to say that they're socialist. There's still private property and so on. And they would say, we're not ratcheting up our taxation in order to become socialist, just like we say in this country, we're not a socialist country. But have we become less free in the last couple of decades, less economically free? Have we started to favor higher rates of taxation and so on? I mean, yeah, we have. So this isn't to be like alarmist about it. Now, you said what's so bad about it? Well, from an economic perspective, what we worry about is that it's not an economic order which creates prosperity. It tends to go in the other direction. And to link this back to your subject of pro-life, the concern there is that when we're thinking about provisioning the human family, right? We're thinking about like economics. What is it supposed to do for us? It's supposed to provision for us, right? In a certain sense, like we can have different ways of ordering things. We could like all be on a little plot of land. I would be the first one to be ruined if I had to farm for my own existence. Like I'm terrible at it. But we could provision ourselves that way. We could all divide up, right? Or we can have this system we have now, which we call roughly capitalist, but it's really like a very complex, interdependent network where we essentially trade the things that we're good at. So I get to teach and research, which is like the best job in the world. For me, I could never grow the avocados, right? But that's a wonderful system. Like it allows this specialization and then trading. And through that, lots of beautiful things happen. You know, one of them is that we can have an abundance of things that we could not produce on our own. And the other thing is that because we're all specializing, collectively, we make more. Now, it's not all about the material goods and like your GDP and all of that. But when you're sitting around thinking with a kind of narrow lifeboat mentality, and I say that because when people are worried about population or the size of people's families, and they have this narrow kind of lifeboat view, like there's just not going to be enough for everybody. Well, I think when you're very pro-life and you want to expand the human family, you should be pretty interested in which kinds of organizations of economic life get us enough provisions, right? So like we want to be well provisioned so that we can say like, I have prosperity. Of course I can welcome an unexpected child, right? Of course I can, there's more at the table. Of course you can come in. I think they're really connected.
That's pretty profound to think of it that way, of creating this economic prosperity through social specialization, allowing us to have this abundance that allows us to create bigger families and provide for bigger families. And when there is a unplanned pregnancy, to say we can do this, like we've got this. I think that's a really profound way of thinking about it that you don't really hear talked about a lot. You know, from where I'm in the pro-life movement, of speaking with students on campuses a lot, I always kind of hear it as of, well, we need these socialist welfare state policies in order to care for women, so that they will choose life, that they won't feel that they have to choose abortion. And there's always like a cost. And I think you said that at the beginning of nothing is ever free. Yeah. And I think that that's one of the things that you know, how can creating wealth, how can, you know, creating abundance solve the problems that people are facing, the real problems that people are facing, those who are facing hunger in our country today, which should never be.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to balance things properly. So we want to pursue wealth, like we want to pursue prosperity, because as you said, people shouldn't be hungry. There's sort of two issues, you know. One is that the whole like that we all together put ourselves in a position to be prosperous as we can be. We don't want to do immoral or bad things, right? We don't want to like, you know, all be working on Sundays and not worship God. I mean, things need to be ordered, but we want to be prosperous. A very secondary question, which is linked up, is how do we make sure that everyone in our community is able to benefit from that rising tide, so to speak? And the second one is not always the same as the first one, right? So like in general, if we direct ourselves in a healthy way towards a more capitalist, more free economy, and again, rightly understood, we see this in lots of other countries, the tide lifts, right? I mean, there is greater prosperity. It doesn't always mean that every single person in that community is also lifted. And that's a whole separate conversation to have, and one that Christians and pro-life people urgently need to be having, right?
Mm.
And there's all kinds of interesting difficulties to that piece, right? There are people who are not able to participate in the economy or earn a living because they have fallen on bad times. People we know today, right? A very serious problem is this sort of problem of the opioid epidemic and addiction. People who are not able to participate because of difficult family situations. Increasingly, when you look at the broad spectrum of our economic life, at least in this country, you find that as a whole, in fact, we have less poverty than we did 100 years ago. So it'd be kind of like a mistake to go backwards. It's not like, and when we look individually at the poor, because on some level, we do always count the poor as those who have less, like it's a relative measure. But when we look at those who are poor, we see that they are in some sense better off today. That isn't to say that they don't have real misery. We have to kind of dig in there. Are there people whose lives can be improved through family ministries? Are there people whose lives can be improved through, job training, through other kinds of social services to help, right? I mean, so it's not clear that there's a government policy to solve the ways in which some people are not benefiting in the way that we would want them to, right? So we can both be like fans of capitalism, again, rightly understood, and also like, and we should be real champions of those who are doing with less, those who are suffering in like really extreme ways, and then thinking about like how as Christian communities can we solve this. And frankly, I think this is like in our families, right? Like you have 4 children, I have a bunch of children. There's always like that one kid who's like not ready for bed at night and, needs a bath. And I have to tell you, like every night you're like looking around at the table, you're like, okay, who's going to do it tonight? Who's going to make sure? And I think that we get a little lazy. Like we look around, we're like, isn't there a law? Can we pass a law? Is there like a program? But at the end of the day, I tend to think that the needy people in our society, they actually need someone to get up, like, and do the serious work of like going there and being with them. And, this is the function of churches and neighborhoods and communities.
Real social justice.
Yeah, like real social work. I just think that's what has to happen. And that, we can get those sort of the laws as good as we can, but that isn't going to go away because we, have some great new plan. I mean, you know what I mean? It's just, it doesn't stand to reason. Like if in my household, someone is always going to need to get their pajamas on and someone's going to need help with that, I don't see how, in society, it's just like, for me, that's a kind of common sense piece. I think women bring this to the table a lot, which is kind of like, there's a certain view of human society, which is like domestic. Like you sort of see like, how does it work in my home? And you get like families are the basic cell. And so I'm suspicious if someone's like, oh, I got this plan, and we're going to solve all the and I'm like, yeah, but there's some kid that's being naughty out there. Right. And that's part of the story. Like of human.
It was interesting when you talked about the COVID and the labeling of business as essential. I think you're right. Yeah. It was a really great demonstration of the dangers of socialism when the government just decided arbitrarily what businesses were essential and which weren't. And the rest of people were like, well, what about me? Like I'm essential. Like, and there wasn't really any legal recourse to go through. And it was a perfect example. Like, yeah, this is why you don't want to give 90% of what you make, what you earn to like a group of people to make all of these decisions for you, because you'll end up wearing that really bad one size fits all dress that no one looks good in.
Yeah.
But like when you think about families and you think about socialist countries, because aren't these principles, these more socialist principles, are they replacing, is the goal to replace the importance of the family?
Yeah, I mean, so this is a tough one. Socialists, present day socialists, if you were to ask them, they would say, well, no, absolutely not. We don't want to replace the family. But they're policies tend to sort of give a lie to that a little bit. I mean, of course, the reason they deny it is because Karl Marx kind of says that, right? So Marx, of course, is really interested in this, and he thinks that the family is a great source of inequality, and he thinks the family is a great source of oppression. So that's why all the modern day socialists have to say, well, we don't really believe that part. We really don't want to replace the family. But they really do. What they want to do is they want to replace all the functions of the family. Right? So, I don't want to replace the family. You guys can be family, but we're just going to take over all your jobs for you. We're going to support your children. We're going to educate your children, right? We're going to make sure you have a house over your head. And, she's like, what's wrong with all that? Well, it's the job of the family. That's the problem. So if you take away someone's job, have you taken them away, right? I mean, this interesting question this is kind of why I kicked off when you were asking about human ecology, with talking about kind of like, what's our job in nature, right? So I don't know, like one of the greatest pleasures I have in life is when I can put something on the table for my child. And I don't just mean like earning it. Of course, earning it is helpful. My husband's tended to be the primary breadwinner in our family, but I love to cook and bake, right? And I don't think it would be as satisfying or as good for my children if, I just had like some government distribution of bread. I mean, to put something that I made for them and it's got my love in it. But again, scale that up. Is it just the same to receive like a house that the government's, purchased for you or subsidized for you versus something that you've been able to save up for? I don't think they're just the same. Right. It's kind of like on some level, we do want to see the things which take place in our public life together as gifts, right? Like this time that we're spending together is a gift. Now, it's a gift of your time. Like I'm getting to know you in a way that I haven't before, and it's a gift. It's also related to both of our jobs and our professions, but it's always possible with a kind of a worldview where we think of God as a giver to see these things as gifts. But the extent to which we sort of like put a middleman in there, a redistributive person or agent in between our exchange, it makes it harder and harder to see things as personal gifts from each other. And I think we should resist that when we can.
Yeah, I mean, because if something's just handed to you for free, often you don't value and treasure it as if it's something that you worked for, that you waited for, that you earned on your own. I think that's really important point. How do we then practically, President Biden, for example, he gave his State of the Union speech, which was like his address to Congress for their first year at the end of April. And he kind of laid out this like really expansive policy, like spend all this money that we don't have, which Republicans and Democrats are totally guilty for. But a lot of the stuff sounded great, like free paid family leave, and they want to pay for children to have government funded preschool even at an earlier age, and it sounds great when you're thinking about how do I, as a pro-life advocate, help a mother in need and help a mother see that she doesn't have to choose abortion. But as you said at the beginning, nothing's ever really free. Yeah. What are the solutions, and have you had conversations with colleagues and other folks in academia about how can we provide solutions, and maybe what would some of those solutions look like to show and to care for every human being made in God's image, without kind of resorting to this dangerous kind of these socialist principles with a few making the decisions for everybody, which, I mean, we all know power always corrupts. So have you guys, you all, I'm talking about you all in academia, have you all figured it out yet?
Yeah.
Of what are tangible solutions that don't resort to that?
Yeah. Well, remember that there's like 6 of us, like members of the academic institutions that are, super pro-life and also, don't want to become socialist. Yeah.
So you have like a Google group, right? So you guys are like
I know
coming
all
up.
6 of them, and like 2 of them work with me. I mean, so I feel like we can hardly we're really outnumbered. I mean, in that sense, in terms of thinking about things. But there's a lot of things that are encouraging. I have family members who are who don't work for kind of big corporations that provide healthcare, and they belong to I think it's like a Good Samaritan, health share program. And one of the members of the family has just come down with a terrible leukemia, and she's in the best hospital in Baltimore, receiving the best care. And they have a lot of confidence that this community that is behind them is going to help them out. And in a sense, like, I sometimes think when we think like, well, where's all the solutions? Sometimes I like to say, like, let's stop and look at where we are and not forget to be really grateful, like that things are the way they are. I mean, how many, I think my husband and I gave to at least 2 GoFundMes this week, that we saw someone who lost a baby in a terrible car accident up at Notre Dame, friends of friends of friends. I didn't even know them, but, it was like such a heartbreaking story. And then, but I mean, there's never been a time in history where it's easier to band together. And I do have friends who particularly do this sort of work through crowdfunding and that sort of thing for specific cases, right? I mean, I just think about like someone like Abby Johnson comes to mind. I mean, every week she's got somebody on her social media that she's crowdfunding for. Has it been so good ever in the past? You know what I mean? Like, and I don't mean to like make light of people's suffering, but I mean, I have a friend who's not an academic, but she's a very fine journalist. She wrote to me out of the blue a couple months ago and said, I've been doing all this work on what labor conditions were like in our grandparents' generation. And she said, it's really horrifying. The things that we take for granted in terms of like time off or, the ability to set certain kinds of schedules. I mean, she said it was just terrible. And we take this for granted. So, I mean, I kind of feel like a good starting place is just to remember that, A, we can't solve every problem, but B, we need to talk pretty frequently about the successes that we have. I mean, I really think that is darned impressive, like what we've accomplished. I mean, as a pro-life community, certainly up against a tremendous machinery. I don't know if we're reaching everybody that needs to know about the resources in the pro-life community. I doubt we are.
If I had $1 billion to end abortion, I would spend most of it telling people about all the resources we do have.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think we have probably been slow to make use of sort of more modern like marketing and certain ways of getting our message out to people. But like, if you show up and want help from the pro-life community and you're gonna get funded, right? I mean, we're like, there's just, I don't know.
Make the day if you're a woman in need who walks into a pregnancy center and says, I need help. Help me do this. Like, you will literally make these volunteers' day, because that is why they get up in the morning and they're literally just waiting for her to come in.
That's right.
I know. I always, when people kind of accuse, if you're so pro-life, you would do this. I'm like, you apparently have never met us, because
that's
let me tell you what it is that we do. And on a daily basis.
I don't know too many pro-life people who haven't at some point in their lives taken someone directly into their home for a short period of time, called on other people. I mean, there's a lot there. And, so I'm not sort of here arguing like, let's rest on our laurels or anything. But my suspicion is that, if you were single and pregnant and in need, 100 years ago, it would have been a little harder to find the kind of outpouring that you can find now. I mean, so I think there's like, we can sit down and identify what are the things we need to improve, like getting the message out. There's so much more we could do there. But then back to the question you asked, I actually am kind of encouraged. I mean, I think these different, there are a lot of really creative and interesting approaches to things like health insurance that are happening now, which it's in some sense, it's like the fleecy lining to things like Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act and things like that. Fleecy lining meaning you go, all right, you know what? There's an appetite for this. We've got to solve this in some other way. And why do we have to solve it in another way? Because, again, these government programs, well, let's just say the best thing we can say for them, they're well-intentioned, but when they're put together by people who don't respect human life, they are bound to do damage. And
I
so
think
we've
it's
seen that.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's proof in that. I know, like this August I was driving to DC and I listened in on the ICER, so it's the Independent Committee. Oh, shoot. IC Economic Review. So basically,
Okay.
they were started by a bunch of fancy foundations, and it's a group of doctors, economists, and they're self-appointed, and they've decided that they review medicine. And then they determined what medicine is worthy of insurance companies paying for. So two of my children have cystic fibrosis. And so there is some amazing drug progress happening.
Yeah.
Drugs that we actually think can give Gracie and Gunnar a normal life expectancy.
Wow.
But they are expensive. It's like $350,000 a year. So ICER on its own developed this calculation called quality adjusted life years. And they decided that, and in this 8-hour Zoom meeting I attended, they basically said, well, even if this drug that my son is blessed to be one of 60 kids in the world on a clinical trial on, even if this drug is curative, meaning it cures CF, which it won't, according to his quality adjusted life year score, it still doesn't justify the cost in paying for it. And this is an unelected board. No government entity has elected them. However, they have now gone to states where states are paying for, and I've described this before, Medicaid, which is, health insurance for people who can't afford it. It's a block grant. So half the money comes to the state from the federal government, and then the state pays for the other half. So then you combine together, that's your fund in the state for Medicaid. So ICER has gone to states and has said, hey, just so you know, these drugs, we've assessed them independently, and we've decided that it's not really worth it. And so now states are saying, we're going to contract with ICER, and they're going to tell us what drugs we should pay. I mean, this is scary stuff.
Yep. That is really scary stuff. And I'm just want to say how sorry I am to hear that that's the situation that you're in. This is scary stuff, and we've seen that. There's a couple angles we have to push back here. One of them is just delegating these, let's just say, deeply ethical decisions about human life to just groups of people that we have no trust in their moral framework or their moral judgments. We should not be doing that. The other issue, to come back to the main core of your program and our concern as pro-life persons is, I want to say this. It's like there's a common mistake both by these planning groups that have quality adjusted visions of human life or whatever, that really kind of wants to tie everything up in this neat ball of planning, right? And you see this family planning, right? We know that sort of the dark side of family planning really is abortion, right? And we start by saying what's so wrong with planning? Well, the problem that is so wrong with family planning, of course, practiced wrongly, there is a responsible way to plan your family. But when they say planning, Planned Parenthood says planning, the problem is that we can't plan perfectly, can we? And then, you need to develop all of these escape plans, which typically involve abortion and different things like this, that there's something twisted. There's just something twisted about thinking that you can kind of plan out, quality of life, that you can plan out all these things. And it closes off room for things like generosity and ingenuity, and just sort of looking at your child and saying, you know what, $350,000, I'm sorry, I'll figure that out. We will figure that out. There is enough goodness in this world to figure that out. So the Planned Parenthood mentality goes together with the planned economy mentality. It really does. And I don't know any other way to sort of make it clear than to focus in on that. You'd think what am I against planning? Isn't it responsible to plan? But, you'll find those same groups are always working together. So, I don't see in our current framework, our current society where we share this country with tremendous numbers of people who don't value human life, I don't see a way out except for us to take some of these things down to a more local level. It's I'm not willing. I'm not willing to let them decide what vaccines have too much involvement with abortion for my taste, right? That's not up to them. That's up to me, and my family. So, I'm the government, and I'm here to tell you
that's it. You have to wear a mask forever.
Like, I'm here to tell you that no babies were killed to produce this. You know what? Let me see your notes. Let me see I want to see what's behind this, and I'd like to know that, do we have a credible commitment to never harm any other babies? Is that going along with your promise that no other babies will be harmed? Oh, no, there's no promise, is there? There's nothing. In fact, you're just outraged that we would reconsider the fundamental, protections in Roe versus Wade. I mean, this is the problem, right? I mean, how to create a nation of anti-vaxxers? Well, you know what? Lie to them about what you're doing, and don't provide them any kind of confidence that you would do anything. You would go way out of your way. You would sacrifice all kinds of conveniences and money and benefits in order to not harm one human child. When I'm convinced about that, I'd be a lot more likely to trust, the statements of the CDC. But, in my opinion, they've created the anti-vax sentiment that they're so upset about.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great point. And I think it actually summarizes a lot of the way I feel about things, where I'm like, no, socialism bad. Giving control to a few group of people, it's bad. But you have to go local, because you have such a culture where we don't actually all agree here in America on the worldview that human life is fundamentally valuable. And so you have to ask yourself, I think, as a pro-lifer, are you willing to allow people who don't have this viewpoint that human life is intrinsically valuable and is worth protecting? Are you good with giving those people the power to make decisions that affect millions, hundreds of millions, and vulnerable people across our country and across the world? I mean,
I'm really baffled, to be honest, in the last year, the extent to which so many pro-life persons don't seem to have a lot of, I don't know, just say healthy skepticism. I mean, most public health officials and so on are dastardly folks, but I feel like there should be a little healthy skepticism. I mean, these are public health agencies that are all in, completely all in on abortion, and they're all in for kids having abortions. They're all in for protecting, predators who make young women pregnant. They're all in for all this stuff. Did they become purely good, exactly 12 months ago? I just feel like there ought to be a little more skepticism there. And I don't mean that in a really radical way, but for me, at least, I'm speaking for myself, I will say that a lot of my skepticism comes from this, because I think, there's a consistent, life ethic. It's right to say that. So I don't trust, it's like, if I see that you're stepping on human life over here, am I going to trust you when you say over here, you really worked hard to protect it? No, I'm going to be a little skeptical. Another point you raised, though, that I didn't want to forget to mention, too, is that, I don't know, we can call it Bidenomics, or what we're sort of looking at now, all these programs that are being passed, more child credits, a kind of greater expansionary policies, is that everybody wants to ignore the elephant in the living room, which is that we don't have a high enough birth rate to support programs like this. Right. And, we could debate about the causes of that. It's one of the reasons I'm doing this research on women with large families. But we could talk about what are the causes of that. But, it's sort of an emperor's new clothes thing. It's like, I know what the numbers look like. These programs like Medicaid and Medicare, they're not going to be supportable. We're not going to have the revenues to continue to support these programs. So even if we trusted people to make decisions in the Medicaid system that we thought were really healthy and moral, we are going to have anyway to think outside the box and come up with other sort of more local solutions to these sorts of problems, because the programs will not be there. Certainly, we knew this a couple of years ago. We've been looking at these declining birth rates, but then this past month, just those newest numbers from the census, really, really shocking numbers. Yeah, it's really bad. Yeah.
I mean, Doctor, wasn't it when Social Security was kind of first introduced in America, it was 10 people were supposed to pay into one person's Social Security.
Yeah. That's
and
right.
then a couple of years ago, it was, I think, down to 5.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And so, this is a problem. Yeah. I mean, there's just no way around it.
Yeah. Yeah. That is
The numbers aren't
absolutely.
going to add up. And it's never in the interest of an existing politician to, because they get to get voted in and so on and so forth. Like there's just a sort of, what would you say,
Pass the
conflict of
buck.
interest. Yeah. Like they're just going to, kick it down the line. But, I was very impressed. I mean, again, not to talk about all bad news. I was very impressed. The last couple of years I lived in Florida with Governor Scott, Rick Scott, who is now in the Senate for Florida. But as a governor, he talked a lot about how because they had cut taxes so much in Florida and really made it a place that was favorable to business, that they had grown the Florida economy so much that although they had cut the overall budget for some of these social programs, they had less people coming to use them. So he used to talk a lot about this, about how, they didn't need to fund those social programs to such a high level because the economy was so booming in Florida. And I liked that he talked about this because he was like, look, of course we want to, but he was like, the goal of our life in Florida is not to have all these people on the dole. The goal is to have such a flourishing economy that people don't need our money. They don't need our assistance in this way. And so he had a really nice kind of set of charts to show, like from the beginning of his governorship to the end. And, I mean, I take it, although I'm not exactly a student of DeSantis, I take it he's sort of continued Governor Scott's policies to some extent. But, like, if we get back to this economic prosperity thing, I mean, it's really true. You can see it even in short periods of time. I mean, you can't see it in 3 months, but you can see it over the course of a governorship that, you can move things in a direction that's more favorable to business. And you really can create an environment in which people aren't needing to go to the food banks, right? Or flip it around. I mean, we saw in, last year, about this time last year, those long, long lines, I don't know. I think people have gotten very spoiled. I think they just think that, like, I don't know, everything grows on trees. It's like if you shut down the economy and all the non-essential businesses, like
except Planned Parenthood, because that was
except
essential.
Planned Parenthood. Yeah, churches are closed. Planned Parenthood is open. we know who's in charge here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I was tremendously dismayed.
That's an interesting point that you brought up, because I think sometimes, I mean, I'm sure you're in Washington, D.C. I mean, the GOP, Republicans sort of have like a bad brand amongst younger people. Yeah. And the brand is like white old guy smoking a cigar in a back room, making a deal and doesn't care at all about poor people. Yeah. And like, let them eat cake. And I find that, when you're talking about Governor Scott and what he did in Florida, now Senator Scott, I find that really interesting because he cut programs, he incentivized businesses to move to Florida, he incentivized families to move to Florida by cutting taxes, which in turn created more wealth and less people who needed government assistance, and allowed the people to have the dignity of work. Yeah. I find that so interesting because I feel like that's something that I guess is missing in like the conversation when Republicans or like political conservatives talk about, cutting, we need to cut this and we need to cut this and we need to, and it kind of sounds like they just don't care. They're just like, we don't care about old people. People. We don't care about poor people. And that's like, no. We just have a different policy prescription that we actually think, and we can prove to you, actually works, that we want to implement here.
Yeah. I mean, to the point about young people, I mean, the Republican Party has had a problem with image for a long time, as long as I've been,
I know.
I'll just say mostly voting for Republicans. And again, for me, primacy of the pro-life issue, I've had to vote for a lot of people I wasn't crazy about, but, for me, that's kind of at the top of the list. But yeah, I could talk about pro-life itself all day long, but to go back to economics for a minute, economics is fundamentally dynamic. This is one of the things that's very difficult to think about when we think about economics. It's like populations. Populations are dynamic. They're never just the same, right? And every day people are dying and people are getting born. And when you want to think about the health of the overall, like you can't easily get just things to stay the same. They don't stay the same. So a state like Florida, it's either growing or it's shrinking. Like its economics are either improving or they're getting worse. There's not really like a stasis. That's a hard thing to sort of manage. So, you kind of have to decide, like, are we in for growth here, or are we in for stagnation? And it's true that there's a bunch of policies we can think of that make it better for growth. And I think that we kind of need to be working towards those things, because let me tell you, the other things that are important for growth, like population growth, like let's just say like babies getting born is good for economic growth. We don't have that. So it's like we already have one hand tied behind our back, right? We don't have the demographics. I'm a big fan of legal and ordered immigration. I think we should have lots of immigration that's legal and orderly, because we need population. Of course, we all need population. And I'm just a fan of people in general. So like, I'm kind of really pro immigration.
But you're like pro people.
I'm like pro people. Yeah, I think we should have more people.
You've only created like 8 of them. So.
I know it's not enough. I could have 10 more if my body would do it, but it wouldn't do it. But we have one hand tied behind our back already in terms of economic growth, which is the demographic engine. So like we just sort of, I think if we want more prosperity, we're going to have to kind of like free a bunch of other things up. But I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening. Like, we'll see. Mm-hmm. I think that this country's, political future in terms of economics is quite interesting right now. So I don't really want to make prognostications here, but I do want to say, I'm sure you feel the same way. I don't think I've lived through a period of 5 years that were as interesting as the last 5. So
yeah, certainly kept us on our toes. Yeah. All right. I have one last question. Since you're a professor there at Catholic University of America, mm-hmm. What does the church have to say about capitalism, about free economies? The Holy Father, Pope Francis, has said mm-hmm. some interesting things about people who own businesses and create wealth. And he's really not helping me in my whole convert my husband to Catholicism plan. He's really in a negative way. What does the church say and speak on when it comes to economics, and how do we create wealth to lift people out of poverty? Or, is socialism the Christian thing to do? Give, everyone size 9 shoes.
All right. So that's another, like, you are great at asking enormous questions. We could do an hour on this. So first I should just say, like, I have a book about this. And so
what's the book?
The book is called Can a Catholic Be a Socialist? The answer is no,
I'm good.
Why. So you can go check that out.
I'm buying it right now on my iBooks. I'm only saying that
because it's I can't cover everything that's in the book. But what does the church say? The really big nutshell. The church says absolutely you can't be a socialist. That socialism is not, it's not even, the church actually isn't interested. I'll say the church is the church. She's not interested in making everybody rich. Like, that's actually not. Now, it might happen that because we're virtuous, we become prosperous, right? But the church is not telling us we can't be socialist because we're going to be poor, although that's a bad side effect. But because the church believes, and the church has always believed this did not get invented like 50 years ago, has always believed this, that God gave the things of the earth to be, let's just say, again, like tilled and worked by individuals, that private property is an important institution. It's sacred in a sense. It's how God intended for us to relate to nature. Is that, there's part of it that's your thing to take care of and part of it that's mine to take care of. Okay, so that's all in there. That is what the church teaches. About capitalism, she's like, it's fine, it's great, so long as it's rightly ordered, and what does rightly ordered mean according to the Catholic Church, if that's what you're asking me? Well, I'm going to say, like, the church is going to say Christian institutions inside of your capitalist order have to be allowed to thrive. You cannot choke them off. You cannot choke them off. Like, you can't.
Javier Becerra.
You can't make it hard for churches to be open, to thrive, to do and you can't take their jobs away from them. You can't do all the charity work for the churches. Bad idea. So a lot of really interesting things there. About Pope Francis, really quickly. It's any priest, any bishop, and any pope, in a certain sense, they are products of their own education. So I'm not here to say that, he couldn't do better with the messaging. Like what the church teaches will not change. The church is not in a position, just like we will not have women priests. We will not all of a sudden be like the Church of Socialism. Even if there are some priests or bishops or popes running around who are like a little bit confused. Now, I actually don't think deep down that Pope Francis is a socialist. He's got his messaging a little bit confused. I know that when he did travel to some places, he visited Venezuela, then everyone was like, oh, and he said, no, like I'm not a socialist. So his messaging is inconsistent sometimes, but he also grew up in Argentina as a place that has never really had, let's just say like a really thriving, ordered capitalism in the way that we think. Lots of crony capitalism, lots of corruption. If you don't know the right people, you're not going to get a job. If that's his view of capitalism, of course, he's really suspicious of it, So I think it's okay to like appreciate, just like John Paul II, he grew up under a socialist regime. And so like he was very clear, like this isn't the path. So, popes, they're people and they have their, the thing, just they have the things that they know more about because it's what they experience. So I think that's like the best light you can put on Pope Francis.
I'm making my husband listen to this part of the podcast. I don't care if he doesn't listen to the rest of it.
If he said it on an airplane, just like don't listen to it. It was probably like off the cuff, and it was probably, I'm laughing here because we all have to sort of take these things with a grain of salt. No one's perfect, but the church's teaching on property, and in some sense, like very simple matters related to political economy, is actually not that complicated, but it's got a 2,000-year history. It's not going to change because, the current Pope came from Argentina and thinks that all capitalism is hopelessly corrupt. So I don't think we have to identify, Pope Francis's feelings or preferences with the teaching of the church. Wouldn't be right. So I think there's hope. Hopefully there's hope for your husband. But I get it. The frustration is real. The struggle is real. For me, just to put it all on the table, for me, when Pope Francis said we don't have to breed like rabbits, I was like, I don't think any human being ever breeds like a rabbit. And I don't think we should ever say that. And I'm not bringing this here to criticize Pope Francis, but just to say, like, there's all kinds of things that can come out of the mouth of a good person. And maybe they're just making a joke, or they don't realize it could happen to me on your podcast.
It happens to me on a daily basis, so don't worry about it.
I wouldn't want to be judged by that moment when I said that one thing, you know what I mean? So
that's why it's called explicitly pro-life, because the staff couldn't trust me not to curse.
That's exactly right. So I think the struggle is real. I have my own struggles with Pope Francis and just some of the things that he says, like in a casual way. But I also trust that like the church is way bigger than any given pontificate. I was a super big fan of John Paul II. My best friend is a super big fan of Pope Benedict, and we'll sometimes go back and forth and be like, just, and I take it that's one of the, the vying over like different spiritual leaders. This goes back to the beginning. Like the apostles are dealing with this like right on day one, right? It's like, I'm with Peter, I'm with Paul, I feel like part of that's just human life. And it's okay. Like, it's okay to sort of have our preferences.
That's awesome.
So I don't know if that's fair,
that was a great, quick answer. I think I really appreciate that. And while you were talking, I looked up the book. So Can a Catholic Be a Socialist? You can find it on Amazon. Trent Horn, Dr. Catherine Pakaluk. There's also another book, The Devil and Karl Marx, that actually I just bought not long ago. So I think that's like a 1-2 punch. I was like, one of the Catholic bookstores is selling them together. So I think you're supposed to read both of them.
Yeah, I have not. That one's just out. It's on my reading list for this summer. The Devil and Karl Marx. It promises to be really great. So yeah, I think, and other guests probably on your show will be able to speak to those other topics. We also have a chapter or two in there, which actually is Trent's specialty on whether Jesus was a socialist, and so some of those topics that are in there.
Okay. That's it. I gotta get Trent on the podcast. I think I've been on his podcast, but I don't think he's been on mine. So he's got to return the favor.
Yeah, he's great. It was a really big pleasure to work on that project with him. He's a great communicator, and
he really is.
I'm a little less, but I'm trying to learn from. He's really has a gift for what he does.
He does, and he speaks, I think, for a lot of Students for Life groups. He's spoken at our national summit
Hmm.
before, so I'm glad to see you teamed up with him. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for your time
You're welcome.
today that you've given us and sharing your thoughts. It was really a privilege to hear from you. How can people, beyond getting Can a Catholic Be a Socialist, how
Hmm.
else can folks like follow you in your what seems to be nonstop crazy life, academia,
Yeah.
mother of eight?
Yeah, so I'm trying to sort of stay off social media this summer to get this book done because they're, but I am on Twitter at CR Pakaluk,
Okay.
and you can easily find me on Facebook. I probably post more on Facebook, but I did have, yeah, I'll be back on Twitter a lot more when I finish the book. I just know that I have to like kind of create some space there, and then I'm here and there. I pop up on the different radio shows and stuff like that. So I'm not super followable, but like to the extent that I'm out there, that's where you can find me. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time, Catherine. And
You're
thank you all
welcome.
for tuning in and listening to this discussion. I hope it was helpful. I hope it started generating some questions in your mind, some
Hmm.
things that you can go and research and look into it deeper. And especially if you came into this episode disagreeing with the whole entire premise of the
Hmm.
season, thanks for continuing to listen. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next week. Bye bye.